need to ask some very, very serious questions.
It's not just that we want to win, there are jobs and reputations on the line here.
Lessons to learn.
I don't know why you keep looking at me for advice. You believe in yourself?
Oxford came here to try and turn the tide, but it has not turned yet.
We can win this.
Not here just to have a fun time.
Utter despondence in the Oxford crew.
Yeah, it would probably really suck if we didn't win.
I will sell my soul to the devil to win this race.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Boat Race Fixture series. My name's Camilla Hadlin-Horrocks. I'm here with Seb Benticree and with Hannah Roberts as well to bring you all of the action from today's first broadcasted fixtures, which is all about Cambridge University Boat Club. We'll be kicking off the first race today at 1:40 with the Cambridge women going toe-to-toe with the Leander women, and then we'll be concluding the day's racing with our Cambridge University men who go up against the Dutch development squad. And Seb, you know, with today's roster fixtures, the Dutch men coming all the way over from the training centre in the Netherlands to face the Cambridge men, how do you think that is going to play out? Anything you're looking forward to particularly?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Dutch have been coming over since 2022 for this fixture, and they always come with a fantastic eight. A lot of these guys have done this fixture before. And have only really been getting more and more experience over the past few years. That Stern pair, Peter van Veen, Eli Brouwer, both senior team guys, really, really fantastic athletes. Eli went to the Olympics and Peter was the spare man. And then Michiel Mantel as well, senior international. So, you know, I think this is going to be a really, really strong Dutch eight, potentially stronger than we've seen over the past few years. That being said, Cambridge this year, really, really, really strong squad, massive depth and a fantastic top end as well. Got Tom Ford racing in the stroke seat, obviously coming off of stroking the GB Olympic 8 to a gold medal in Paris. James Robson was the Olympic spare. He's actually ill today, but Noam Mwele is filling in for him, which I think is testament actually to the depth of this squad this year. The fact that you have a two-time boat race winner subbing in to the Blue Boat for this fixture. And then George Bourne, who's the GB single sculler, is right there in the middle with Luca Ferraro, twice boat race winner in 7. So, you know, I think it's going to be a fantastic matchup. I think the Dutch, such technical oarsmen, but obviously really big and strong guys as well, always pose a great challenge. So I think should be in for a really good race.
Yeah, definitely. I cannot wait to see how far, you know, Cambridge have come since trial eights and, you know, the sort of training that's been done over the winter. And Hannah, for you, looking to the women's race now, anything particularly stand out? Obviously, the Leander crew that we've got, talking of pedigree, right? We've got 3 Olympic medalists on board coming down the track in just an hour's time, or in fact, just as we're about to start this broadcast. But yeah, it's going to be a great race, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm I'm really hoping to see some kind of tight racing today. I think the Leander crew is very strong. It's kind of a mix of Caversham and Leander Club athletes, and as you say, a number of Olympic medals in that Leander crew. But I think I wouldn't write Cambridge off. There's some good international experience in that 8 as well, particularly in the stern, and that kind of mixed with their kind of boat race experience with Carousel sitting at 5 from last year's blue boat in the middle of the crew, kind of driving that kind of tideway experience. So I think it should be some really, really good racing today.
And Hannah, it's beautiful sunshine here in Putney. You could not ask for better boat race fixture day conditions. I'm sure they'll be praying for this to come in April. Now, you know all too well that sort of preparing for conditions it plays quite a vital role in this period of the winter. Do you actually think that some of these guys here that are about to go on the water are thinking, oh, well, actually, I was kind of hoping for a little bit of rough to see if we could practice what we would do in a situation like this, like you found yourself in 2016?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the fixture days are all about kind of practicing your kind of race process, and that's kind of from the point that you put the boat on the water and into the racing itself, and that's like being next to another crew, but it's also kind of learning the tideway. These crews they're training out in Ely and for Oxford and Wallingford, and you don't get that many opportunities to come and train on the tideway and race on the tideway. And I would always say that I'd love some rough conditions on fixture day and lovely conditions on boat race day. I think you really want to get that practice in. So I think probably there will be a number of them that are a little bit disappointed to see kind of the sun shining and the no wind, the flat water out here today. But yeah.
And look, conditions are just one part of it, right? And Seb, coming back to you, the fixtures play a whole heap of different roles to different people, to the coaches, to the coxers, to the athletes themselves. What is it that these athletes will be looking to achieve, not only as the sort of athletes that are racing in the blue boats that we'll see feature today, but also in the opposition? What are these two crews trying to get out of these matchups when they go head to head?
I think, in the lead up to the boat race, you don't get that many opportunities to actually practice on this course in a high pressure situation. And the fixtures are just by far and away, apart from trial 8s, the best preparation that you can get to actually go head to head, one-on-one on the tideway. So you're really looking for close racing, and I think the coaches have done a great job in recent years of matching up crews, and the Dutch and Leander should pose really, really close races for Cambridge. But also I think, we'd be lying as athletes if we didn't say that you're always thinking about what's happening in the other camp, and the fixtures are a really quite vital stage in terms of the ongoing battle between Oxford and Cambridge, because you're looking at how Oxford are doing relative to the same crews that you're racing. So it's quite a high stakes situation, really. You want to do well in these races because you want to send a message to Oxford or to Cambridge that, okay, we're in a good place, and we're going to give you a really good challenge on boat race day. So yeah, it's on one level it's just fantastic prep, but on another it's a psychological step in the ongoing boat race challenge between Oxford and Cambridge.
And you've both done a number of campaigns with the blue boats and with Goldie and Blondie. If you were to give one short piece of advice to athletes that are going through this sort of trials period whilst also balancing academics, trying to focus and think about the main day that's happening in a month's time, what advice are you giving to these athletes that are going through this for the first time, whether that be as a sort of new undergraduate or having come here for a master's from the international team or whatnot?
Well, I think for me, now being on the other side of it, I think it's just to really soak in these experiences. I mean, training, preparing for the boat race, and then going on to do the race is just the most unbelievable experience I think you can have in the sport of rowing. There's nothing quite like it, and only now, I think, being on the other side of it, I kind of realise how special that time was, and it goes very quickly. It's a short season, and as I say, you don't have that many chances to go and race out here on the tideway. So I think every time you have these experiences, you just got to make the most of it, really try and soak in the atmosphere, because it goes too quickly. And yeah, the boat race is a pretty special thing for a rower, I think.
Soak it in. Don't get yourself carried away thinking that those ergos will be over too quickly. Relish every moment of the 5Ks. That's what I'm hearing from you, Seb. Hannah, any sort of additional advice from you?
I think Seb's kind of said it all there. I don't think there's no other university programs that really get the same experience as these Oxford and Cambridge athletes get in terms of travelling, having the media coverage, the eyes on the race. It can be very overwhelming when you're in it, and as Seb said, it's very intense and it goes very quickly. And I think taking the time to kind of step back and kind of enjoy the process is, I think that would be my key takeaway.
No, brilliant stuff. Well, look, we'll be joining the crews lining up in just a few moments' time. Both the Cambridge women and Cambridge men will be doing 2 half-course pieces, so they'll get 2 opportunities to shine and try, as Seb's already mentioned, show that they're on pace to beat their opposition, in Oxford in this case, when it comes to race day in April. So we'll be joining you for both of those fixtures kicking off at 1:40.
Okay, so Leander versus Cambridge. We are racing at 1:40. Leander, if you'd like to toss the coin. Cambridge, a nice clear call of heads or tails while it's in the air.
Tails.
It is a head.
Say you're cool. You're cool.
Really?
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
So Cambridge lose the toss and pick Surrey. And I will see you down beyond the railway bridge about 10 minutes before the start time. Have a great race.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I'm here with Sammy Morton, who is in the Cambridge University women's squad and will be stroking today's blue boat against Leander. Sammy, we were just saying you were part of the Thames fixture earlier on in February. Big shift now. You've gone from bow pair up to stern pair. Like, how has that decision come about and how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I would say, honestly, like with all crew seating selections, I never have any idea what the coach's rationale is. But feeling very excited. I got to stroke the boat, one of the crews for the trial 8s, and so it'll be nice to get kind of another shot at stroking on the tideway again today.
And what did you learn, I guess, from the trial 8 stroking experience? What are those things that you're now thinking about to put into practice today?
I mean, a handful of technical things always. We kind of have a really nice crew focus that's going to anchor us to getting a really good rhythm. But beyond that, I think kind of being a little bit more aware of where I am in the course, because in December I had no idea what any of the monuments or markers were. Mm-hmm. So I've got it down now.
Good, excellent. And you've got a beautiful day for a fixture today, and you know it's a pretty stiff opposition in Leander, right? They've brought a really strong crew. How are you feeling about these 2 pieces? You talked about some of those focus points. What have you talked about in the lead up with Paddy into this fixture?
Yeah, honestly, we never really discussed the opposition much. We got to race a Leander crew, which I think is quite different to the one today, a couple of weeks ago, which I had no idea what would happen going in, but was very pleasantly surprised in how we managed to stay internal. So I think that'll kind of be a key point to bring through today as well, is, you know, the only thing you control is your crew, and so we know a handful of points in the race and technically that we really want to nail, and so just focusing on those.
Brilliant. And you've had a big block of training, I guess, since trial 8s. You've had 1 fixture so far. How has training been going and all of the testing, seat racing? How have you managed that alongside academic studies and quite a tough part of the training cycle through the winter?
Far out. I have to say, honestly, a Cambridge degree was a lot more intense than I anticipated. So last term was definitely a lot of figuring it out, but kind of coming back post-training camp, which was really productive and super fun, really good for team bonding. I finally feel like I've settled into the swing of things, so that has made this block a lot more manageable, and it also kind of feels like we're really making big strides as a crew. We're doing a lot more race pace, a bit more side-by-side work, and so it kind of feels like it's all starting to come together.
Amazing. Well, best of luck for today. We'll be looking out for you obviously on the commentary, and yeah, best of luck against Leander.
Thanks.
Well, a very good afternoon to you and welcome to the first of our broadcasts for the fixture series for the boat race at 2025. My name's Camilla Hadlin-Horrocks, joined here today in the commentary box by Seb Benscree and Hannah Roberts, who will dive into a little bit of analysis with them later. But we have got a gorgeous day here in Putney to welcome the challengers. Leander going up head-to-head with the Cambridge women and the Cambridge men kicking off in just over an hour's time, going up against the Dutch development squad. So first race on the card will be Cambridge women going head-to-head with Leander. Let's take a quick look at the crews. We heard a little bit from stroke seat Sammy Morton in the Cambridge crew just there ahead of coming into today's broadcast. Excited to see what she can produce in the stroke seat, but opposite woman Annie Campbell-Ord, straight from the Paris 2024 8 that produced a bronze medal over the summer of last year. 3 Olympic medalists on board in that Leander crew, and a really competitive crew, certainly for us to, well, 4 Olympic medalists actually, because I've not even mentioned our Olympic champion Hannah Scott wedged there in the 4 seat as well, so not part of the 8, much like Eve, Lauren and Annie, but some more Olympic talent on board that we'll go diving into in a few moments' time. But like I say, joined here by 2 extremely experienced Cambridge alumni. Seb Benscree, president in the 2023-2024 season of the boat race, a boat race winner 3 times over. Fantastic to have him with us. And Hannah Roberts, who was president of Cambridge in the 2016 race, the race that I think caused all the drama, lots of conditions very different to today. But look, welcome both. Seb, this first race on the cards I think is going to be a great one, and so many international names littering these crews.
Yeah, I mean, you could not ask for a better fixture. I don't think just the standard of that Leander opposition for Cambridge is really extraordinary. I don't think there's necessarily been as good a fixture opponent as this Leander 8. I think top to bottom, just a fantastic group of rowers. And going up against a really, really strong year for Cambridge. I think this Cambridge Blue Boat, huge amount of power and experience, just a fantastic balance of fresh international talent with the likes of Claire Collins, Annie Wertheimer, Sophia Hahn from the States, and then Tash Morris, Sammy Morton as well. And you know, I think that's balanced by a really good core group of returners. Carousel really kind of underpinning it in the 5 seat. You know, fantastic athlete, won the boat race last year. Gemma King as well, the vice president, huge amount of experience, been at Cambridge for a long time. And then Katie Hempson, who started as a lightweight and is now stepping up to a blue boat lineup, and I think that's been a huge and really inspiring progression from her. So to see her racing in this fantastic Cambridge boat against such quality opposition, it's really great to see.
Yeah, and again, I think that's one of my favourite things about watching these crews through the years, and watching that step up of people that go from the reserve crews into the seats within the potential blue boat lineups. And again, we can't call this the blue boat yet, but as we get closer and closer to race day, we'll start to see the forming combinations of what could be announced at the crew announcement in a few weeks' time. Hannah, you've been here in this situation. You've been sort of lining up against fixtures opposition. Talk me through a little bit about how this sensation is and what this feels like for these crews right now.
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing now is probably the most tense part of the race for most athletes. I think once you've taken those first few strokes, everything kind of relaxes and the shoulders come down, but it definitely is part of the kind of prep for the boat race, is kind of having this feeling of kind of coming under Putney Bridge and kind of all eyes on you from this point.
Yeah, and deceptive today, clean blue skies, but having watched the water, it's a really fast moving flow that we've got today on the ebb tide, so don't let it fool you. These crews will be sort of being pushed around underneath the surface of the water, trying to get ready for that sensation where they have to turn their blades and get started. Leander's still not sat with spoons in the water here, Seb. They're just taking their time. Doesn't look like the crews are quite in alignment yet.
Yeah, I think the start of the fixtures often takes quite a bit of time. The coxes want to make sure that they have absolutely the best line they possibly can. steering so crucial for the boat race, obviously, but for the fixtures as well. The tideway, such a changeable course in terms of the conditions, and the stream is so important. So they'll want to get the best start possible.
Well, here we go. There is the start, and looks like a really clean start there for Leander, who are on the right-hand side of your picture. They won the coin toss that we saw just before coming into race day, so they've chosen that station over there. They've chosen the Middlesex station, which is unusual, I would say, for a coin toss winning crew, but perhaps something that they'd spoken about. And of course, this is 2 pieces, so we're going to do a half-course piece now, round to about the Chiswick at the Blue Doors, and then we'll start another piece, so they might swap over. We shall see. But about half a length's lead here, and again, Cambridge on the back foot, Hannah, just as we come in towards the Putney embankment.
Yeah, and it might be that Leander was kind of expecting this, particularly choosing the Middlesex station. It's kind of common for crews that think that they are punchier off the start to kind of choose that side, because there's the advantage as you come around Craven Cottage for crews on the Middlesex station. So if you think that you can kind of push it out and get kind of clear water with that station advantage in the first few minutes, then that's a very common choice.
Now, if we look at the stroke ratings in the bottom left-hand side of your picture there, Cambridge at a much higher rate of striking, driven on by Cox Jack Nicholas, new into the Cox's seat, not part of the trial eights even for this Cambridge women's group, but having joined the squad a little bit later in the year in November, has now sort of stepped up into this seat and pushing them along, as I say, 39 strokes a minute, 37 for Leander, which Seb, I guess, is a crew that's probably only just formed, right, of a mixture of trialists and club athletes. Leander wanting to keep it a little bit safer at the lower rhythm.
Yeah, I would say so, but I mean 37 is also a pretty, it's a pretty punchy rate for already almost 2 minutes into the race. I think the difference, I would say, for what it looks like now, is just Leander giving the boat just that little bit more time. You can just see the length of the stroke at either end. It just looks like calm, collected, composed. Cambridge still pretty racy, trying to hang in there, but I would say that Leander just looks like it has that confidence over the course at this stage.
Well, that's exactly what you'd expect from Annie Campbell-Ord in the stroke seat. We've already mentioned her. There she is with the pink cap on the right-hand side of your picture, the Olympic bronze medalist who sat in this seat in Versailles to take them to a podium place at the Paris Olympic Games, backed up by Philippa Emery in the 7 seat. Now, a multiple under-23 medalist, and interestingly enough, racing her former crewmate from Durham University, where they both studied their undergrad, in Tash Morris, who sits in the equivalent seat in the blue boat there behind Sammy Morton. Now, Sammy Morton, we talked a little bit about her. We heard from her earlier. She's jumped up into this stroke seat from the 2 seat, so a really, really different shift. And Seb, I want to come to you on this, because you've raced, at various points in the boat, various seats. What does that shift mean? What is Sammy going to have to be focusing on? I know you've never been in the stroke seat, but you have certainly made that move from bow fore to stern fore. What's different here for her to think about?
Well, I did actually stroke Goldie in 2022 for that race, and the stroke seat is a difficult place to be on the tideway. It's because of the nature of the water and the pressure that you're under, it can be quite easy to slip into a bit of a panic, I would say, in the stroke seat. But I would say that Sammy's doing a really good job here. It's not an easy thing to do, to go from the bows to the stern. The bows, you're looking for punchiness, you're looking to really, really pick it up, take the weight off the people in front of you, whereas in stroke you want a bit more composure and you want to give the crew that time. But I think she's doing a really good job here, and they're sticking in. Leander's had this initial Middlesex bend, and I think Cambridge are actually doing a really good job at this kind of mid-race pace to stay with them.
And then we're about to come to the end of that advantage of the Middlesex bend and start that really long wind in towards the Surrey bend. I always describe it as the inside lane on the running track that Cambridge are about to embark on. And Hannah, you were 7 seat in your crew, so we were just talking about Tash Morris. She's got that job here in the blue boat, the Jesus College athlete there, who's backing up Sammy Morton. What's important here for the 7 seat to be thinking about as we start this, what looks like a real mountain to climb for them to get sort of back in contention with Leander?
Yeah, I think absolutely. At 7, you're part of that stern pair. It's kind of your responsibility there to really drive that kind of base pace and rhythm. And I think it's something that Cambridge have done really well over the last few years, is establishing a really strong race pace through the kind of middle section of the course. And it's something that we saw last year from the 2024 crew. They had a real belief in their kind of base rhythm and were able to kind of row back through Oxford after having that first advantage. So I think, you know, Paddy really establishes crews that kind of build that strong base rhythm, and I think that Tash Morris is kind of doing a really good job here, kind of filling that role.
Yeah, and she's backed up by Claire Collins, who, you know, we talked about her strength and power, was a member of the American Olympic team. So she is one of the few Olympians that Cambridge have got on board in comparison to half the crew for Leander that we're looking at the moment. And interestingly enough, she's sat here in the 6th seat in that Cambridge crew against her opposite number from the GBA, Eve Stewart, who we just saw there on screen. The two 6 seats there going head to head for the first time since the Olympic Games. So pretty astounding stuff. But Claire, 2 Olympics underneath her belt. She sat there in the 6th seat. We heard her name all through trial 8s, all through the fixtures, from so many of the crew members saying like what experience she brings from the women's 4 in Tokyo, from that women's 8 in Paris. Such a figurehead for them, and brings so much experience. But you know, again, Seb, Leander have got that in spades, right? They've got 4 athletes who have been at the top of their game on the Olympic podium, and joined by what is probably going to be known as Project LA, right? The group that have been racing at the World Cups in the development boats. That's a pretty strong unit, even if they've not been racing together as an 8 combination. I think you can't really look past, on paper, the sort of experience they've already had to date.
No, I mean, absolutely. The experience up and down this Leander boat is really, really exceptional. And I would say, just looking at the way they're rowing, despite being a relatively fresh combination, probably quite a scratch combination, they're just so cohesive. And it's really paying dividends for them, I would say, at this stage of the race. That being said, I think Cambridge potentially on a bit of a move here. Now that their Surrey bend is kicking in, I'd say that they're reducing that margin a little bit, starting to claw back some of that clear water. And I would say if Cambridge can really drive it into this next couple of minutes, then we might see a little bit of overlap again by the end of the race. But I would say that Leander boat still looks very, very comfortable and very strong at this stage of the race.
Yeah, they're rating a couple of pips lower still. They're down at 33 strokes a minute in comparison to Cambridge at 35, who are at the point in their season where they're getting prepared to race at those kind of rates, right? Leander won't have sort of got to that point yet in their season if they're focusing on the international season that takes place from July, August onwards. You know, Cambridge are only a few weeks away from being to be at race pace. So I think that's where we're probably seeing that difference in stroke rating, but it's still paying off highly for Leander here. I think the gap is closing, Seb. I think you're right. Now, talking about this cohesiveness from the Leander crew out in front, a lot of them have been in pairs for the sort of GB trials. So, you know, Eve Stewart and Lauren Irwin here in the centre of the boat, they were a combination second at GB trials. Also, you know, Juliette Perry was in a pair as well, racing at the GB trials earlier this year. Eleanor Brinkoff won trials, in fact, actually, as well in February. So lots of these small boat combinations coming together in a sort of 8 can also, I think, pay dividends, Hannah, in the sense that knowing how to row with your partner in the boat pushes that technical model, you know, from stern to bow.
Yeah, I think having the kind of small boat work really improves kind of athletes' boat feel, and I think that helps a lot in terms of gelling kind of crews together quickly. You spoke how this Leander crew will be relatively scratched compared to perhaps the more established Cambridge crew, but I think that small boat work will really help them kind of feel each other more and come together really quickly, and we can kind of see that paying off here.
Now, Sab, you mentioned that this Cambridge crew starting to come back now a little bit from behind. I think they've stunted progress a little bit round the bend there in Hammersmith, but given that we are in a fixtures piece where we're doing 2 halves of the course, they're actually now coming to near the end of this piece. Do you think that plays a bit of a part, or do you think that they will be practicing at this point in time this portion of the race, or are they going to be winding up for the finish of this piece? I hope that question makes sense.
Yeah, I think, you know, in the fixture you're always cognizant that this is practice for the boat race. And what you want to do is execute these stages of the race as well as you possibly can to give you information how, you know, things might actually go on race day. That being said, you're always going to want to race the crew that's beside you, and you know, I think this Cambridge boat will be looking to sprint towards the line. I don't think they're they're going to treat this last couple of minutes as if they were sort of halfway through the boat race. This will very much be a piece to the end of the island.
Yeah, we're getting there, and you'll be able to see as we come round the corner, there's the Ayet in the background, just on the right where those trees are. So we'll be racing towards the end of that Ayet. Leander, I think, drawing back out again here. But talking of the new cocks on board for the Cambridge women here, Hannah, Jack Nicklaus, you were saying that Paddy had great confidence in his racing ability and reading races really well, which I think pertinent when you're, a couple of lengths down on a leading crew.
Yeah, absolutely. Paddy has told me that Jack, prior to coming to Cambridge, was a ranked Formula E racer, so I think that's given him some kind of experience in terms of kind of reading the races and kind of knowing kind of the line that he needs to take, especially on the tide where it's such an important race for coxes. But I think he's also coming up against Jack Totham in the coxing seat for Leander, who himself is a boat race alumni for Oxford in 2022. So yeah, some really competitive coxing, I think, between these two.
Yeah, Jack is one of those. Jack Totham, I should probably say. We've got the two Jacks here in the coxing seat for both crews. But Jack Totham, who is out ahead there, you can see his back on the right-hand side for Leander. Not just a Leander Cox, but like you say, an Oxford Blue, a winning Oxford Blue in that 2022 crew that was just absolutely stacked for the Oxford men. So he's got experience of winning a boat race, leading a boat race. Seb, how important is it to have a Cox that's got that knowledge and experience, especially for a crew here with Leander, who have probably rarely done side-by-side racing in this format?
I think it's absolutely crucial. I mean, the boat race is very much a Cox's race. I mean, it's talked about a lot, but it's absolutely true. The Cox can 100% make or break your boat race, and I think Jack has such valuable experience from that 2022 race, coxing what might be considered one of the best boat race crews of all time, and he's got confidence, and I think he's doing a really, really good job with this Leander crew, and the race seems to be going a bit longer than expected here.
Yeah, they're just starting to wind down now, getting a little bit carried away, enjoying themselves a little bit too much. But no, first piece there to Leander, which, again, given the quality of crew we've got on paper, we've mentioned Jack Totham in the cox seat, Anna Campbell, we've already mentioned as well, Philippa Emery, Eve Stewart in the sixth seat, another Olympic bronze medalist. And we've got the Dutch coming over a little bit later to race Cambridge, her herself, a Dutch under 23, moved over to the British senior team only last year to sneak into that 8. So great to have her on board in this Leander crew, and backed up by fellow teammate from the women's 8 last summer, Lauren Irwin as well. Hannah Scott, well, we've seen a lot of her in the media coverage, part of that brilliant quad sculls medal that pipped the Netherlands to the gold in Paris last summer by one stroke.
Fantastic race.
One of the best races, not only of rowing at the Olympics, but of the Olympics, I think. Potentially
the top race from the entire games, really, in the rowing. What an unbelievable sprint through from that crew, and not a hugely experienced crew when you think of how old these guys are, how many years they've been in the sport. I think it's a relatively fresh crew, not a huge amount of Olympic experience there, but then to come back and win by that kind of margin on the biggest stage of all, I mean, what an inspiring performance. And I rode with Hannah at Princeton. She was in the year below me, and just an insane athlete even then, and then to see her step on and on over the last few years has been just truly breathtaking, really. Yeah, and you can see her there, she's got the headband on, she's sat in the 4th seat here of the crew closest to us for Leander, the athlete from Northern Ireland, welcome home as a hero to Ban Rowing Club and to Coleraine after that Olympic Games as a champion, and great to see her back in a boat, actually, because again, she's not been part of the trialling process this year, but I think this is a lot of these athletes kind of forking the road to decide whether they are going to continue on to LA, which again, for the likes of Annie, Eve, Lauren, Hannah, great to see them back in and amongst the upcoming group. And going back down the crew in the 3 seat, Lauren Carey, the Yale graduate, who is again got under 23 experience underneath her belt, looking on to try and make that next Olympic Games. Juliet Perry has already been a spare for the British team out at the World Championships last year, raced in a few World Cups, and as I mentioned, Eleanor Brinkoff, a trials winner from February this year. So all of these names combined together, experience with people that have already been there, have already done it once already, with the up and comers. This really is names to watch for the future here, Hannah.
Yeah, I think that, the calibre of this Leander crew kind of is unquestionable. I think they're going to be vying for that kind of top spot at Women's Head next weekend. But I think what we can take from the piece that we've just seen is that the Cambridge crew put in a really strong performance there against a crew that on paper is kind of very, very, very strong. And I think that the way we obviously saw Leander move out to an early lead, but that kind of didn't really stretch out particularly far, and the Cambridge crew kind of the resilience in their kind of racing was very impressive. And I think that kind of Paddy looking on, I think probably will have been pretty proud of that.
Totally, and I do think we were about to do a second piece now over the second half of the course, and often having watched the fixtures series in years gone by, the result can be flipped quite often, right? You can find that the crew that trailed in the first piece does end up, sort of turning over and becoming victorious in the second. In terms of the sort of step between those two pieces, Seb, what is it now that Cambridge you think will have to do from that piece we've just seen to try and come back at a Leander crew, which may start a little bit down, just given the margin that they've won by? They might sort of stagger them off this start, but in a different format now, having to try and stay ahead perhaps through this next section of the course.
Yeah, I think the big thing for a Surrey crew coming into the second part of the fixture is to capitalise on that initial bend. So, the first piece, Leander had the first bend, but they'd already stretched out to about a half a length lead by the time their bend actually kicked in. So I think what Cambridge will be looking for now is to really try and get a bit of a margin around that first Surrey bend. And if they can go into that barn stretch ahead and feel like they're kind of in a bit of a position of control over the race, I think that really pays dividends once you get through Barnes Bridge and then around that last Middlesex bend. I mean, the second piece of a fixture is, as I'm sure Hannah would attest to as well, a brutal piece. The first piece is always like a kind of all or nothing sort of effort, and it absolutely kind of takes it all out of you, and then to have to sort of get up and go again for another racing start and then another pretty long piece is really, really challenging and really testing. And I think, the fact that Leander is a relatively new outfit and Cambridge will have more time and experience together, I think this might actually play into their hands a little bit. So that combined with that initial bend, I think Cambridge basically just have to put in 2 huge minutes off the start here and see if they can get a lead on Leander.
Well, you say that, but it looks like we're going to be potentially flipping stations for this second piece. Leander certainly heading. Oh no, we're rolling back around. We'll see where they end up. But look, I think that it's good practice as well. Like we've seen in boat races gone by, it's not common, but it can be the case that you do get a restart. Again, it is very, very few and far between that we get to that point, but we have seen it in the last decade or so. Hannah, I mean, your race was, I think, a race that caused drama in its own sense with the swampings and the sinkings, but had you sort of prepared as well for potential restarts, and is this a good way of prepping that, getting yourself back in the mindset, having finished a piece and about to start again?
I think kind of you have a kind of what ifs conversation with your crew, and kind of that kind of comes into it as an element. But I think in your mindset, your kind of main focus is on a quote unquote normal race in terms of kind of running start to finish. But I think that what kind of the 2-piece structure is really good at is kind of putting you in a place of hurt, because the boat race is kind of unlike any other racing, really. I think because the course is kind of has these bends, and kind of the main race plan is kind of get up and stay up. It's a match race at its purest, and kind of from the start you're kind of just trying to get one over on the crew alongside you, and so that does mean that it is kind of 16 to 20 minutes of absolute pain. So kind of having this opportunity to kind of have done a piece already, get the lactate in your legs, and then kind of go off in an immediate world of lactate, I think is quite useful for race prep.
An immediate deficit.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways I think the fixtures are almost harder than the boat race. That period of sort of sitting in the lactate once you've stopped is really pretty difficult to bounce back from, and your legs feel like absolute jelly in the first couple of minutes of the second piece of the fixture. So yeah, it's a massive challenge. So we'll see how Cambridge can respond here.
Yeah, and I think it also gives you kind of an element of belief in kind of this world with telemetry, what these athletes will be able to see is kind of their telem data after having done a piece already, and kind of it'll really give them confidence that they're in a lot of pain, but they're kind of still delivering kind of the power output that the coaches are expecting.
Well, hopefully, or potentially the opposite. In my case, last year, it was the opposite.
Well, here we go. We're underway again, and like you can see, we were talking about a stagger for this time around to give Cambridge that advantage off the start, given the sort of deficit that they finished in. And let's see if they're listening to Seb and Hannah's advice to try and put in a really hard 2 minutes here with the bend to their advantage. I mean, Leander are absolutely flying up the outside there on Middlesex, and I think their game strategy here, I would say, is try and get level ASAP. So they've got nothing to lose as well, Leander, right? The women's 8 head of the river is next weekend. I assume that we'll see a crew akin to this, maybe not this exact crew, but a very similar crew to this racing over the full course, but not in that side-by-side format. So really, you know, they're just here to have a great drag race side-by-side with absolutely nothing to lose.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to remember about the fixture. The stakes for Leander are nothing really compared to the stakes for Cambridge, just because any result for Cambridge or Oxford is going to be analysed by the other side, and Cambridge want to be, you know, delivering great margins against some really quality opposition, purely to send Oxford that statement of like, okay, here we are this year, we're a really, really good unit, and we're really fast, and we can mix with the absolute best crews in the world.
So true. And actually, really interestingly there, the ratings completely changed in that we've got Leander now rating higher than the Cambridge crew. So I think maybe in their sort of team chat, their crew conversation, they've gone, look, we need to press on at least a bit more if we're going to try and be that little bit racier off the start. So they've made that change. They're rating higher than the Cambridge crew, and maybe Cambridge have thought, do you know what, we can take a little bit more time over this, learn some lessons from Leander, a little bit more efficiency and power per stroke, and I think that's a well-developed rhythm actually that Sammy Morton stepped on from that first piece, and they're just giving them that little bit more time, Hannah.
Yeah, I think sometimes the first piece can kind of get that kind of adrenaline, anxiety out of your system, and it allows you to, off the start in that second piece, kind of the shoulders are a bit more relaxed. You don't have that extra energy to waste on kind of being kind of tense about the racing. So it can lead to a kind of more relaxed, longer rhythm, and I think we're seeing that from Cambridge now.
Yeah, it just looks like the strokes are better finished off now in the Cambridge boat. They're sort of sending out the second half of the drive a little bit better, and as a result the rate's a little bit lower, but the stroke's just longer and more efficient. And I would say they're actually sticking really well in here, and Leander are piling on the pressure, but I would say that Cambridge is staying really composed, and the racing's really close at the moment.
Yeah, I think Leander are actually having to ratchet up in order to be able to get the same result as they had in the previous piece. So I think that's really good news here for Paddy's crew, for the Cambridge women, and brilliant as well. We've not really talked too much about the bow four of the Cambridge women's crew, who will be seeing Leander come into the corner of their eye as they're paddling here. Seb's already mentioned Carousel, a boat race returner, a winner from last year's Blue Row, somebody who learnt to row at Cambridge, so an amazing story for her, looking to contend yet another blue boat, but she'll be watching Leander just roll past now as the bend starts to turn to their advantage. Annie Wertheimer in the 4 seat, she's the sort of fun, energetic, she's got a little lightning tattoo on her wrist, and she's saying it's because she brings the energy to the squad. A former swimmer from Rutgers University, from their varsity 8, but brilliant to see her contending in this crew. And then Sophia Hahn in the 3 seat, who will be racing her former Yale compatriot Lauren Carey over in the Leander crew. They're seat for seat, were both in the varsity 8 for Yale last year, so going head to head on this stretch of the Thames across the pond, followed by Gemma King, yet another returner, and Katie Hempson in the bow seat. Like as Seb was saying, brilliant to see her step up from Blondie, and no Molly Foxall in this crew, who we saw contesting in the Thames fixture earlier on in February. So a bit of a shift, bit of a change here. We've changed seating order, we've changed a couple of people. That is what this period is all about. But as I've been talking, Leander have started to press through, but it doesn't look quite quite as easy, Seb, as it did in that first piece?
Yeah, I would say Leander on a really, really good rhythm again, but not taking massive amounts out of Cambridge stroke on stroke. I think Cambridge really hanging in quite well here. The rhythm is holding together pretty well as the water starts to get a little bit of chop on it, and I think maybe Cambridge are a bit more used to that little bit of liveliness on the water. So I would say it's looking like a good race as we come into this last bend, but then of course we have that final Middlesex bend, which is going to heavily favour Leander as we come towards the finish line here.
Yeah, you can see that on the horizon there as the river disappears into view. That is all the inside track here for Leander. So in order for Cambridge to stay alongside, they are going to have to be faster than Leander effectively to keep this contact. And I wonder, Jack Totham is sort of keeping them pushed out, I think, off station a little bit. Now, Hannah, that is creating a lot of wash and a lot of mess. You can see the Cambridge blades sort of smattering across the surface of the water there.
Yeah, as you kind of get to that kind of length up kind of distance, it does give kind of Jack Totham a bit more freedom in terms of his racing line. As long as he's not impeding Cambridge, he's kind of free to kind of move around under the kind of watchful eye of the umpire. But what he'll be doing is both kind of trying to push Jack Nicklaus off his line and kind of move Cambridge into the slower water, but also kind of that dirty water coming down under the Cambridge boat does impact the way that you're kind of able to feel your rhythm, and kind of does disrupt your kind of stroke pattern a little.
Now, one of the things about Fixtures Day is that the river isn't closed to other crews. We just saw a couple of other crews there returning in the channel on the right-hand side. Now, how similar, Seb? I've never rode the boat race. I've only ever rode this course on a race day when it's closed to all other traffic. The weather is the weather. How similar is it to the conditions on the day where you get those kind of bumpy patches of water from launches that have been bombing up and down, from other crews, other races, camera boats, all those sort of things must create a bit of a swirl and a wash on the water when it comes to the blue boat races? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you don't get are passing coaches in different launches creating side wash, but usually the river's pretty high at the time of the men's blue boat race, and as you say, there's been a ton of wash generated by the media launches and just the flotilla that follows the preceding races. So by the time we raced, it's pretty much always been a little bit dicey out there, but that's kind of what you feed on as a boat racing crew. And wow, I mean, look at this move by Jack Nicklaus, cutting on the inside as we come up to the finish. Really interesting move there, actually, to kind of take himself a bit out the stream but try and look for that inside line. Yeah, really interesting here. And I did say that, we thought Jack Totham was kind of pushing off station a little bit, and maybe this is Nicklaus going, well, hang on a second, actually, I think you should be a little bit further in, so I'm going to stick to what I think my line is. And if you're on the wrong side, then that's your risk to take with the umpire, Matthew Pinsent. I'm going to stick here, thank you very much. And they do look, Leander look awesome here from the side-on shot, so cohesive for what would have been a reasonably scratched crew. I did see them out yesterday along the Henley stretch, but they've really not had too much practice, but much closer. I know that the Cambridge started ahead, but I think that would have been confidence inspiring for Cambridge to have made those improvements to the second piece. Yeah, I think absolutely they've kind of reduced that margin, and also having the outside station off that in the Surrey station on that Middlesex bend, I think that was a kind of really strong performance. I think we spoke to kind of the more relaxed rhythm kind of off the start of the piece, and I think that kind of lasted throughout, and it served them really well. Yeah, I think that was a much better piece from Cambridge, actually, and reflected in the result. But I just think that rhythm really served them well, and then they were just able to hang on around that last bend in a way that I'm sure Paddy will be pretty pleased about. It's a very difficult thing to go into that last bend on Surrey a length down, and you could see Jack sending them the dirty water. They were rowing in wash, but that crew really stuck in, and to have the deficit only really open up by, I don't know, maybe a seat, 2 seats by the end from the start of that final bend. I think that's a really, really good performance, and I think there's a lot of positives to take away from that final piece there. Yeah, and look, we're just going to take a few looks back here at the first piece, a few highlights, and you can just see the almost three-quarters of a length that Leander managed to jump off the start there. And I think Hannah called it absolutely right, that as a crew that won the coin toss, choosing Middlesex, you know that you're a powerful and punchy crew to be able to get that lead and sit on it. But look, I think that this as a crew is about as close as we're going to get to a national team crew that we've got racing in a post-Olympic year. Cambridge, one of the things that, you know, our commentary team caught up with Paddy and caught up with Lucy Harford, the president of Cambridge, and one of the things that came out of that interview was appreciating that these are all students with academic commitments, where training isn't their be-all and end-all. To be that close in the second piece and to take those learnings and to push on with an international level crew is pretty amazing for a group of students to be at that level.
Yeah, and we heard Sammy kind of talking about that in her interview earlier, about how she was kind of surprised by the Cambridge workload when she arrived in Cambridge, and it is something that kind of all of these students have to deal with, is their kind of academic studies outside of rowing. This Cambridge crew has two kind of clinical year medics on board, so they'll be doing kind of placements in and around, around their training out in Bedford. And it's not just kind of the time commitment, it's the kind of the energy that all of that takes. It's less opportunity to rest, less opportunity to kind of plan meals and kind of take that time to kind of refuel and kind of recover from the training load that they'll be doing, which won't be too far off kind of an elite level training program.
And recovery is, you know, it's far more than the training in terms of, like, you look across a week and you look across a day, the hours that you're resting, studying, doing all of those things, far more than the training equates to. So actually, if you have more recovery time, more downtime, more brain space just to focus on that, the more advantage that you get. And so, yeah, the fact that the Cambridge students are doing that in and amongst everything else you've got to balance with university life, I just think is incredible.
No, absolutely. And I think particularly on the women's team, the way Paddy structures his program is by running everything really early in the morning during the week, and that means that it's often 5 a.m. wake-ups on weekdays for those athletes, and then, you know, getting back to Cambridge, being in class by 9 a.m. That's a huge thing to do every day of the week for 7 months. So it's a real challenge, and I think, but it's testament to the strength of the program, the quality of the coaching from Paddy and from Matilda Horn, that you have athletes who are able to balance that, who are able to learn to row and develop at Cambridge, and then put in performances like that against national team quality eights. I think that's really testament to the strength of the program.
Yeah, and you know, again, we mentioned Juliet Perry, who was in the Leander 8. She was at Oxford. She started at Oxford, right? So she went through that and has now progressed on to being on the fringes of that squad. So it might be possible for all these people to continue that journey into an international career, should they wish to. Now, we are going to take a short break now, but one of the things we've got to look forward to is we caught up with the historic, or two members of the historic 2015 women's boat race cruise, the first time that the race was ever run on the championship course on the Tideway. So we'll have a look at that interview on the 10-year anniversary of the first women's boat race on the Tideway.
All that training comes to this, a moment in time for women, for sport, for rowing, for equality, the Newton Investment Women's Boat Race.
The coxes, and we're underway. History is made on the Tideway as the women's boat race is underway in 2015. Leading away from Putney up this 4.25 mile course. Digging deep already, this strong surging start. They had a dream and now it's about to be realised. A dream of a few for so many years is taking shape in what has been a man's world.
It's hard to believe that it's now been a decade since the women's boat race moved here to the championship course here in Putney. 2015, the first time ever the women's race was held here alongside the men's race on the embankment here in London. And I'm lucky enough to be joined by two members of the crews that raced there on that momentous occasion. Holly Hill, who was the 6th seat in the Cambridge women's crew, and Emily Reynolds, who was also the 6th seat, the opposite number, in the Oxford crew. Now, Holly, again, 10 years ago now, I can't quite believe that we've come so far in 10 years, but for you, on the build-up to that move to the Tideway, it must have been a pretty special and momentous occasion.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, as you say, it's kind of incredible to think that was 10 years ago now. It feels kind of like yesterday and also like another lifetime. It was really special. I think the key thing I do remember from the build-up was remembering at the time kind of all the women that had come before us and how much effort had gone in over really a number of decades to get us to where we were. And then in some respects, we were the lucky ones that got to benefit from their endeavours. So it was both very exciting for us, and also we had a big bit of your brain that was thinking, don't let those girls down that have made it, so that we've got this opportunity. But yeah, it was incredible.
And Emily, you were sort of an international athlete coming over from the States to a race that I'm sure you heard many things about. What was it like as an American athlete arriving here in the UK to what was probably one of the biggest occasions in women's rowing at the time?
Well, I just felt so lucky to have been doing a one-year course at Oxford, and it happened to be the year where the women were moving to the Tideway. So to be part of that was just incredible timing. And I think the experience of British rowing versus American rowing, rowing is where it was born. So to be part of this experience in England, in London, racing down this championship course is unlike anything you could ever do in the US in terms of racing. So to be part of it was absolutely incredible.
And many people before you and after you, we're here today because we've got the trial-8s taking place. So that new generation of athletes going through what you did 10 years ago. And talking about 10 years ago, Holly, you were part of what was a losing Cambridge crew at the time. A decent winning margin for the Oxford crew. But racing, interestingly enough, in a boat that was called Project Ely. And looking at how far Cambridge have come, now off the back of multiple back-to-back wins in the women's race, it must be amazing to look back and think that that's how it all started.
Yes, absolutely. I think at the time in that year we were aware that we were a little bit behind Oxford just in terms of our sort of preparation and perhaps the facilities that we'd got and that kind of thing. So we actually raced in that 2015 race in a boat that was called Project Ely. And I think it was the start of kind of building that new Cambridge legacy, starting up that new era. And so, at the same time we were building the boathouse. At the time, we would do a session actually, and I don't want to moan because we were very lucky, but we would come in off the water and there'd still be there'd be no upstairs, and there would be gaps in the walls, and then the wind would be blowing through, and you kind of go, I was actually warmer on the water than I am recovering. But it was the start of, as I say, the next kind of era of Cambridge rowing, and actually it's been so exciting to see how that legacy has developed. And as you say, we've had a good winning streak so far. So here's to Project Ely, and here's for a Cambridge win this year.
Well, I'm sure Emily's got things to say about that. And we're, as we already mentioned, we're here at trial-8s. Emily, any kind of resounding memories for you about your time at Oxford going through this period? I mean, again, it would have been the first time, I assume, that trial-8s would have been held here on the Tideway for the women.
Yeah, I think the whole experience of racing on the Tideway, both trial-8s and then the build-up to the boat race, was just quite surreal. We never had, my previous racing experience was always racing every weekend, get out there, have a good race, go home. It was quite relaxed. And then here, the build-up was immense. And so to be part of that and just swept away with what that was, the anticipation going in, counting down the days until the big race, was just unlike anything else I've experienced.
And how does it feel having been part of something that now, the numbers of people that watch the boat race? I mean, even just here on the banks, it's 250,000 people that we've got standing alongside the river here, and even more, obviously, on television, watching on the BBC. How does it feel to have started that movement off? Because, prior to this, the women's race wasn't televised. If anything, it was just whoever was the friend's family going down to Henley-on-Thames to go and watch. So How does it now feel to have started that movement and seen how far it's come with the number of spectators that the women's race now gets?
Yeah, well, I don't think I can take any credit for starting the movement, that's for sure. That started way before me, and as I say, we were just the lucky ones that got to really enjoy that first year, which was, I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. The sort of hype around it, the excitement, it was brilliant. But no, we obviously didn't start that. But I think just feeling like a little bit. I remember Matthew Pinson, I think, saying when he was commentating that it was just a little piece of history, and that is what it felt like. It felt like you were part of something bigger, and now to see the way it's developed, and actually women's sport in the UK as a whole. You've got the Lionesses doing incredible things. You've got women all over the shop, just really taking sport to a new level. And so to be part of that sort of wider piece about women's sport and the progression of it through the years is very exciting. So yeah, a little piece of history. Thrilled to be part of it, and then very excited for the future.
I don't know if you can hear it at home, but I've got the Oxford Cox in my ear, and I've just heard her say, let's do this for everyone who made this happen. Let's make history here today. So they know exactly what they're doing here today. They know that they have this race in the bag. There's nothing really that can go wrong for these Oxford women now, but they want to show how important this race is for them and for those, as they say, who made it happen.
Well, it was great to see something that Seb has spent a lot of time and effort producing, that amazing piece of footage interspersed with some of the great clips from the BBC footage from race day of the 2015 women's boat race. And yeah, really enjoyable to catch up with both Holly and Emily, who were part of those two historic crews on the day. And Hannah paved the way for your crew, I guess, in 2016, being the second ever crew to take on that challenge. I mean, what did you take from the 2015 lineups and their experience?
I think having the 2015 lineup go first. So I was in the Blondie crew in that year. So it was the first Blondie on the Tideway, and I kind of had a few days in and out as spare in the kind of blue boat. I was covering injuries and stuff, and I think that kind of helped me kind of get some experience in terms of the high pressure nature of kind of racing on the Tideway, because I think coming from Henley, it was very well supported by kind of friends and family and alumni of the race, but it's a completely different scale, kind of bringing the race to the Tideway, and just the eyes on you and the pressure it's something that the fixture series kind of really helps with, in terms of practicing kind of that race day mentality and kind of routine and becoming familiar with the environment. And for me, kind of going through that as kind of a Blondie crew in 2015, when the pressure isn't quite as high, kind of helped me kind of prepare for 2016 and kind of was more familiar with the environment by the time I kind of had that kind of all eyes on me experience.
And I mean, the crews now have had 10 generations, I guess, 10 rounds of athletes that have come before them that have taken part on the boat race on the Tideway. But like you say, prior to that, the women's boat race had been taking place on the Thames upriver in Henley-on-Thames for a number of years. So it's really hard to believe that shift only came 10 years ago. And so, I mean, anything that you learned putting that piece together, anything that you found surprising or that you learned from that piece, from the athletes that made that big transition?
I just think, I don't know, it was an inspiring thing to work on, really. Just clearly such a foundational and important moment, not just in the history of the boat race, but in women's sports in general. And yeah, just listening to Holly and Emily talk about their experience was so fantastic, and the fact that the women's boat race has been held alongside the men's now for the last 10 years is I think so important, and has produced some really exceptional racing, and yeah, I was proud to work on it, and very inspiring to me.
It's got still a long way to come, I'm sure, right? I think that in terms of the sort of pipeline of athletes, the men's boat race obviously has been held here for best part of almost 2 centuries, not quite there yet, right? But almost. And to think that the women's boat race, so much younger, not only on the Tideway but overall, that sort of reputation internationally, it's getting there. The word is being spread. We heard Sammy talking about Paddy going across to speak to the team at Penn about coming and being part of the boat race squad. But still, I think there's something to be said for having role models who have gone there and done it before you, not only internationally but also from the pathway of the undergraduates themselves as well. I think it's clear to me that from the women's crews, you get a lot more people that learn to row at Oxford and Cambridge as part and parcel of the boat race, blue boat crews, than you do on the men's side. And I think that's because the homegrown talent has to be there, because there's not as many people that come to race for the 2 universities from further afield. But again, I think it will get there. I think there will be more and more, and we've seen it year on year. And we talked a lot about Sammy, Claire, about Annie in the previous crew, and we've got, again, on the men's side here, a few internationals that have returned back to the Cambridge crew to give the boat race a crack because of its reputation. So excited to now look towards the men's race, going up again, speaking of international talent, against the Dutchmen. We're kicking off at 2:42, so 15 minutes time or so. And we are going to take a look at the coin toss that took place a little bit earlier on.
Don't worry. Throw it high. Okay. Cool. Tails.
So that's heads, that was tails. So you have one toss.
I'll take the series station.
I'm here with Luca Ferraro, men's president at Cambridge this year. We're about to see the Dutch fixture, which has been going on for the last, since 2022. The CBC men have raced a crew from the Netherlands. And yeah, we're going to get started in an hour or two. So, Luca.
Hello, Seb. Thank you for having me.
I rode with Luca for 4 years, and it's great to see him now as president of the team. So, take me through the season so far. How have things been shaping up? Obviously, it's a post-Olympic year, so you've got a huge influx of really strong talent. How's that kind of shaped the season for you so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's made it a really exciting year to be a part of CBC. The strength and depth, I think, is it's definitely the best that I've seen in my time here. No shade, obviously, but yeah, it's been really thrilling to get to row with such an array of talent from across the rowing world, and I think that's really kind of shaped our attitude this year as well. We've really stepped up our game, I think, in everything that we do, and tried to raise the standard to match that kind of high performance environment that we have on our hands, but also keeping a sense of the fun and the the silly side sometimes when it's appropriate. I think getting that balance right is a big part of the boat race season, because it can get pretty grim at times. So keeping that sense of fun is very important.
Speaking about it getting grim, how has the training been? Have there been any differences over the past, from the past few years in how you're approaching things this year?
We've definitely stepped the mileage up, I think. I mean, Rob does kind of say that every year, so it's hard to keep track sometimes. But yeah, it feels like we're pumping out more mileage than ever before, because the guys we have this year can handle that bit of extra training, and everyone's recovering well and dealing with that. But it is a big stress on the bodies, just pumping out that kind of volume of KMs every week, and it's meant as well that the selection side of things is pretty brutal when you've got the talent that we've got. There's 4 or 5 guys for every seat instead of just 1 or 2. It's really tricky to manage that, and the guys have done a great job at dealing with those pressures, but it has been difficult, obviously.
And we know head coach Rob Baker really likes to leave selection open right up until a few weeks before the race. So are we seeing any selection battles playing out in the fixtures today and over the next couple of weeks?
I wouldn't say that there's any specific one-on-one battles to look out for, but everyone's still in the mix. Rob hasn't closed selection and won't do for the next couple of weeks into the race. So I think it's important to keep an eye on all the players involved. I mean, if you look at our lineups for the Blue Boat and Goldie, it's kind of stacked all the way down. A lot of returning Blues racing in Goldie today, who obviously have what it takes to race in that Blue Boat, so still sort of vying for those seats. And unfortunate, got some illness with Robson out today, so Noam is stepping up, Vice President Noam stepping up to fill that seat, and I'm sure he'll do a great job. In some ways it's difficult, obviously, when guys aren't ending up quite in the seats that they'd like to be, or they feel they might feel that they deserve to be, based on their abilities, because we have that kind of strength. But I think it's also a massively reassuring thing to know that right the way down the squad, anyone could really fill in to those seats in the boats above, and no matter what happens on race day, we will have a boat full of guys that are up to the task, and I'm sure Noam will prove that today.
Fantastic. So, racing the Dutch, what do you hope to get out of this fixture ahead of the boat race in just over a month's time?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really important one for us. With such a strong crew on our hands, getting some tight competitive racing is really crucial in the run up to the race. And so to look internationally for that, I think, is a really good idea. And the Dutch, they send over strong crews every year, but this, by the looks of things, might be the strongest one they've sent yet. So I'm really excited about the challenge that'll pose. Got some big names in the Dutch crew, kind of some guy, 1 or 2 have been part of the Olympic system in the last Olympiad, and some big names in the future. So be exciting racing, hopefully, and a very close race that we managed to win epically would obviously be the best scenario, but who knows how it'll play out. Yeah.
Fantastic. And looking ahead, a month and a bit, the boat race itself. Oxford, really, really strong squad this year. What kind of challenge are you anticipating from them?
I mean, they always bring the heat. It's hard. We don't think too much about what's going on over there, but it's obvious that they're going to be a really strong crew this year. They care so much about winning the race. Everyone's putting as much as they can into it, so I don't doubt that they'll bring everything that they have on race day. But I'm just thinking about Cambridge at the moment and making sure that what we have is enough.
Great to hear. Luca Ferraro, thank you so much.
Well, great to hear there from Luca Ferraro, who's in the 7th seat in today's fixture. And we'll look at the crew lineups in just a few moments' time. But Seb, you were interviewing your former crewmate there. Great to hear him, I guess, being so complimentary about the depth of squad that Cambridge have got this year, and to have a sub coming in for James Robson, the quality of Noam Muel, who is a 2-time Blue Boat athlete himself. I mean, that's got to be pretty indicative of the quality that they're facing this year in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the depth on the Cambridge men's side this year is the best I've ever seen. You just have to look at who's currently racing in Goldie. So you've got Matt Edge, another double boat race winner, obviously was stroke of last year's Blue Boat. Brett Taylor, who has a boat race win to his name in 2023, won Goldie last year. Simon Anayan, GB U23 world champion. Tom Mackey from the Harvard varsity. You've got Canadian U23s in there. I mean, it is an unbelievably stacked reserve boat, and I think, that just says everything really. And when you look at this blue boat, there is a ton of talent here, and I think from what we've seen so far at Head of the Charles and just in that initial fixture that they had against that kind of international crew with some Spanish athletes and one of the Sinkovich brothers that happened a few weeks ago. I think this is a really good looking unit right now from Cambridge. So I'm really excited to see them race today, and great to see Noam as well back in the blue boat for today. I'm sure he's going to do a great job subbing in.
And very very different to the Oxford men's cruise makeup. We'll see their fixtures broadcast in a few weeks' time on the last weekend in March. But I guess the issue, is it an issue? I guess the strength Oxford men have is that they've got a really strong top end, top 4 or so athletes that are littered with international experience, blue boat experience, and then quite a steep drop off where they've really had to sort of develop and get guys to step up to complete the remainder of those seats, or who are still in contention for those seats. So they're very different squads going up against each other this year. But, we were just talking, Seb, about, moments in the past where late call-ups have been a thing. You were talking about 2003, 2018. We were talking about it happened with Oxford, right? On the week leading up to the race, there was a replacement. So I think, yes, it's unlikely, but if that were to be the case, Cambridge are in a completely enviable position, I would say, as opposed to the Dark Blues in this circumstance.
Yeah, and I think what's been so strong about the Cambridge programme over the past few years is just the quality of the coaching. I think Rob and Bill, sort of in conjunction, have created a really, really strong pattern across the entire squad. And I think the guys mix around a lot, and I think everyone's very, very comfortable just sort of hopping into boats, and what the style is, what the emphases are. And I think basically that leads to anyone being able to step up into the provisional blue boat lineups and do a cracking job. So yeah, I think the depth is great, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they're able to produce today.
Now, one of the things, I guess, we mentioned the Dutch have been coming over for a few years now, but Hannah, I guess they are a reasonable unknown quantity. Some of these athletes have been, racing the World Cup season last year. A few of them did actually race this fixture against Cambridge 12 months ago. But unlike Leander, I guess that as a combination, they're a relative unknown, really, to Cambridge. Now, does that play benefit to the Cambridge squad going up against someone that they really have no comparable speed to? Or would you prefer to know the measure of someone before going into the race?
I think it depends on the kind of mentality of the individuals as athletes. I mean, some people are very, very internal. They won't be kind of looking around at all. And some people kind of want to know their opposition kind of head to toe.
Now, speaking of opposition, let's take a look at the crews for today's lineup. So going up against the Cambridge crew that we talked about with that late change for James Robson, we've got Noah Moole coming in, and you can see he's shifted back to the 2-seat to allow a little bit of a switch up. Gabriel Marler will move up into the 4-seat from that 2-seat. So just a little bit of less disrupted rhythm perhaps, we shall see. But in the Dutch crew, well, we've got a little bit of Olympic talent on board. Ailey Brouwer in the 7-seat, who comes fresh out of the men's Coxless 4 at the Paris Olympic Games last year, made the B final, 7th overall in the rankings, and joined by very experienced strokeman Peter van Veen, the 26-year-old who's been rowing with the Dutch squad since 2022. Another Olympian. He was an Olympic spare at the Paris Games last year. But a few names that through last season made the trip over to the UK, not only for the fixture, but also to race at Henley Royal Regatta. So just taking a bit of a look down this crew, there were a couple of quads that came over to race in the Queen Mother, and with that there was a few of these Dutch athletes that have raced down that iconic course further up the Thames, and we'll see them in action in a little in a few moments' time. So finally, Sarah Calf in the coxswain seat. She's back again. She coxed last year's fixture against the Cambridge men, won a bronze medal at the World Cup last year in Poznan with the Dutch Development 8 for the women, and great to see her, so strong and coxing after a severe bike accident that she was part of. A car, she was hit by a car whilst on her road bike. Used to be a rower, and now has taken to coxing and has been so successful, running alongside the Dutch squad representing Neuhaus. So great to see her back in the coxswain seat. But looking at those lineups, Seb, I guess looking at the Cambridge men, you've rowed with a couple of these athletes, but a few newbies into the boat for this year. Douwe de Graaf, one of your alma mater from St Paul's. We've also got George Bourne into the crew. Tom Ford at stroke, also new into this crew. And just taking a bit of a look at the rest of the field, we've got a couple of athletes across the pond from Brown University as well. So, it's a sort of combo of newbies, old hats. How do those two forces come together, and what does Rob do to sort of combine new forces with old hands at the boat race?
I think the great thing about Rob's style of coaching is that he really adapts based on the athletes that he has in front of them. And on a year like this, where you have a lot of international talent that's used to massive amounts of volume and big, just a lot of training, Rob will adjust the program. And as Luca was saying, he's bumped the mileage up this year just to make sure that we're staying on top of things. But I think the returners, what they're really useful for is kind of imparting that culture that you develop year on year. And I think, a guy like Luca in 7 is just going to be so instrumental for that. But, also looking at Luke Beaver in the bow, who came as an undergrad for the 2023 season, has rowed twice in Goldie, one of the youngest guys. Actually, last year, despite being a second year, he was the youngest guy on the Cambridge squad. To see him now sort of stepping up into this top lineup, and he's been in here throughout the year. Actually, he was in the top lineup for the head of the Charles result as well. I think that's just fantastic, and he's a real culture guy. He's kind of at the forefront of all the fun stuff that comes with being on a tight knit sports team, and just seeing him in here, kind of gelling things together from the bow is really fantastic. I think it's going to be a great balance of those returners, and then that really exciting new talent. Obviously, Tom Ford coming in from the GB Men's 8 is going to be setting down a fantastic rhythm. I think the guys have a lot to learn from what he's doing in the stroke seat. And then those Brown guys used to really intense training at Brown. That's kind of what Brown's known for, is just the sheer intensity of the program. And then Douwe, absolutely fantastic oarsman. I think unbeaten in a pair, pretty much. Was at Harvard and stroked the Leander top 8 last year. And then George Bourne behind him, GB single sculler. Just missed out on the Paris Olympics. It's fantastic to see him such a key part of this Cambridge unit. And Darren George, obviously, just off the back of winning at GB Trials in the pair. So fantastic to see George stepping sideways from sculling into sweep boats so well. And Ollie Boyne in the cox seat, who has done quite a few Goldie races, has been president of the club, and now is stepping up into a kind of provisional blue boat lineup. So just a really exciting lineup.
Yeah, totally. And, like you say, George essentially learning how to sweep whilst at Cambridge, and then going on to win those GB trials in February, I think was a big performance. But himself and Douwe de Graaf sits in front of him in this boat. We talked in the women's race a little bit about how pairs combinations rowing together in the bigger boats are key to setting a fantastic rhythm. So we'll watch out for that in the middle of that Cambridge crew on the left-hand side of your screen. But just as we get ready, the Dutch put their hands down. Sarah Calf decides that they are straight and ready. Ollie Boyne not quite as comfortable, but here we go. Blades in, and there really was no hanging around there from Sarah Winkles in getting them underway. And a little bit choppy here, a little bit bouncy through these first few strokes, Hannah.
Yeah, and you kind of see that as kind of the tide comes higher. The women's boat race on race day runs much earlier than the men's, so you have that much lower tide, and the water tends to be kind of stiller and you see less of the kind of chop up, but here we see kind of the impact of the tide being higher on the Fulham Wall, and kind of some kind of reverb from kind of launch wash and other disturbances in the water really impact the kind of the levelness of the water, and chops it up much more as you get kind of later in the day into the men's race time.
Well, as they come past us here where we're based at London Rowing Club, not much to choose between them, but I think as it stands at the moment, Cambridge with the advantage of just about a boat canvas on this Surrey station. They're down at 37 strokes a minute, the Dutch punching that a little bit higher at 38.5. And blimey, Seb, you could fit a double-decker bus in between these two crews. They're staying well clear of one another through the first 300 metres.
Yeah, it's interesting that. Not really sure who's on the better line. That kind of betrays my ignorance on actually where the best racing line is, but you don't usually see that in fixtures. You generally get crews coming together and fighting a little bit more for that middle of the river where the stream is.
Well, do you know what, actually, maybe Sarah Kauf a little bit scarred from her fixture last year, because in 2024 there was a clash and a restart against Cambridge, if you'll remember, up by Harrods, and so maybe her learnings from that is let's just stay well clear, let's stay clean, and try and get ourselves the best start. But they might start coming together now as they approach Fulham Football Club.
I do remember that, and I was actually ill for that fixture, so I was watching in a launch, and I was quite pleased not to be part of that particular clash. It looked quite brutal, but this is a good performance here from Cambridge off the start on the Surrey station. Managed to get a little bit of a lead just before the Middlesex bend kicked in. Now it looks like the Dutch are really capitalising on that bend, and you can see the water pretty choppy, the Dutch really leaning into it now, and I think they've got some really big strong guys in that boat, and that's going to stand them in good stead as they come around this initial Middlesex bend.
Yeah, absolutely, Seb. I think one of the key players, certainly for the Dutch, Michiel Mantel in the 5 seat, the Washington alumni, the under-23 gold medalist from 2017, who's been sort of in and around the Dutch squad for some time now. Was in one of those Henley Royal quads that we mentioned and raced the fixture last year. So to plonk him right in the middle of that boat, tons of experience exuding to both ends of the bow fore and the stern fore from him in that 5 seat. And they have now managed to pull alongside here, Hannah. They've really, really used their part of the course to their advantage.
Yeah, it seems like the Dutch crew have kind of found a bit cleaner water than the Cambridge crew. I think Cambridge seems to be further out into the chop around that Fulham bend, and from the first kind of 500 metres of the race, it looked like Cambridge kind of had the more relaxed rhythm, but the Dutch crew just looks to have kind of relaxed into the race and have these long clean strokes now, which seem to be paying off for them.
Yeah, what I would say about that Dutch crew is, a lot of these guys have raced this race before, and what you tend to get from the Dutch lineup is a group of really, really strong individual rowers who have been trialling for the Dutch national team in single sculls over the past few weeks. So they don't have a ton of experience racing in the 8 on a course like this, on the tideway where the water's really choppy. It can really kind of throw them, and it has done for the past few years. I would say that this Dutch crew looks a lot more cohesive and actually really driving a fantastic rhythm at this stage of the race and sticking right with Cambridge. I would have actually thought that Cambridge would have pushed out a little bit more, but this Dutch crew is really showing their class, I think, showing their quality at this point.
Yeah, I was talking to one of the Dutch coaches, Rogier Blink, who's come over with the Dutch squad with Dirk, and he was saying that actually a lot of these athletes in this development crew would have been peaking for the January singles trials, which the Netherlands run, for that opportunity to train as part of the senior team, which a lot of these guys managed to sort of get a result that was strong enough for them to train alongside the national team. But he said that with that, obviously their peak being in January, they're now right in the slump of a big old training block once again, which means that they're maybe not quite on the same sort of training cycle as Cambridge will be as they start to sharpen up and move into this racier part of the season. And you can see here, as we've settled onto rhythm, Cambridge, I would call this more of a sort of grind out rather than sort of a jump out into a lead. They've been slowly but steadily pushing, centimetre by centimetre, and now as they turn into their bend and we see Hammersmith Bridge on the horizon, they're one length up here on this Dutch combination.
yeah, I would say the Dutch really capitalised on that Middlesex bend really well, but as soon as that straight started to pan out, I think Cambridge really put a bit of a shift on, and you can just see the length at either end in that Cambridge boat really driving it out into the second half. And now coming up to the Surrey bend just past Harrods Depository, I think Cambridge are going to really start piling on here. I think they are looking very, very strong, and that rhythm coming down from the stern is pretty formidable.
Now, Hannah, they're taking a reasonable amount of time around the turn, actually. They're sort of allowing the boat to move underneath them as they finish off the stroke. Tom Ford in the stroke seat, creating and setting up that rhythm, moving back down towards the boat, an Olympic gold medalist at doing that particular job, so you'd expect as much. But I guess in terms of the rest of the crew, they just look particularly cohesive as they set up off the back end, and I think that's something that Rob's been great at year on year, is getting a whole load of styles together and getting them to row in one technical model.
Yeah, so the boat race season is a lot shorter than most programs, so kind of running 6-7 months into the peak in April, and I think that it's really something that Rob has to focus on, is bring people in from lots of different programs at the start of the season and kind of get them gelled together kind of very quickly. And we've seen kind of the technical model of Cambridge is that kind of very clean rhythm around the back turn. It's paid dividends over a number of years, and it's also something that's we see the Cambridge crew kind of stretching their lead further as we come under Hammersmith Bridge, and it's something that's easy to deliver when you're kind of in that comfortable position out front, is kind of have that relaxed back end turn, because you're kind of feeling like you're in control of the race.
Now, you've got to have a sort of air of confidence about you to be down at 34 strokes a minute. I know, Seb, you're going to tell me that's still quite high, and it will feel quite high for those guys in the boat, I know. But in comparison to the women's race that we saw earlier, where we were up at sort of 36, 37 through this middle part of the race, they've got to have real sort of trust and ability to allow the boat to run when you're racing opposition head to head down this course, which can get quite exciting, and like you say, all you want to do is beat that other crew. To be down at 34 at this point is reasonably they're showing off, is what I'm looking to say. They're looking pretty good.
Yeah, and I think that's, when you have guys as experienced as obviously Tom in the stroke seat, and Luca at 7 as well, who's been in the stern for the past couple of boat races. I think that's what you end up with, is just that clarity of rhythm, where you can sit relatively low on a 34, but actually it looks lower than that, doesn't it? It looks like 30, 31, just because it's so long at either end. And it just looks like great rowing. I think this is a very strong performance from Cambridge at this stage.
Well, looking back to the Dutch, who are near to us now on picture, Peter van Veen, a great stroke. We can't sort of look past the pedigree that he has. The Triton rower, we've already mentioned, he is a spare for the Olympic Games in Paris, and Ailey Brouwer as well. You've got another Triton stern pairing combination, setting up a great rhythm for them too. And I think the power in the Cambridge crew has really sort of put them out in the position that they're in at this point in time. And let's just take a look back a little bit further in this Cambridge crew to this sort of middle four that we've got, and we've brought Gabriel Mara up into the 4 seat to bring Noah Moole in for James Robson at 2. Jumping seats up on race day, being put in a middle 4 with the experience of Dower, George, Luca in front of you, that must be reasonably daunting for Gabriel Marler, but he's taken to the challenge well here, Seb.
Yeah, I think so. But Gabriel is a really experienced guy, and he's been in the top boats at Brown for 4 years, and he's a real powerhouse. He is absolutely one of the strongest members of the Cambridge team at the moment, and I think actually middle 4 is a great place for him. I think back at 2, maybe he's not able to use quite as much of that raw power as he is right in the thick of it in the 4 seat. And I think, in the last sort of 3 minutes, they really just extended out that margin. And it just looked, even from here, even from this angle, you can just see the strength And the sharpness there at the front end, they're just picking it up so dynamically and quite aggressively, I would say. It's an aggressive rhythm from the Cambridge boat.
Now, Hannah, we heard not only from Luca, but also, when we were catching up with Rob and Luca ahead of this race, talking to them a little bit about how the training block's been and getting a bit of insight into the Cambridge Camp. Mileage has been mentioned, uppage of mileage, and I think this is the portion of the race where that comes to fruition, and you can really see that this is exactly what these guys have been training for as they come to the end of this piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of when you see kind of the difference in the kind of the two crews' speeds here, we saw that Dutch crew really punchy off the start, really kind of taking it to Cambridge, and then as we're coming into kind of 4, 5, 6 minutes into the race is really where kind of that additional mileage is going to pay dividends. And kind of as we come under Hammersmith Bridge, we go kind of beyond that kind of 2k course point where most crews are kind of focusing their attention on, and that's really where kind of the Cambridge kind of additional fitness from that volume is going to come into pay dividends.
Well, look, we're going to spin now, but that was an overwhelming victory for this Cambridge crew, which, again, we're not going to call the blue boat at this point in time because, like we heard again from Luca and yourself, Seb, you were talking about how Rob leaves selection really open until the last minute.
Uncomfortably
open and uncomfortably late. But these guys in this crew, for today, they are in the premium crew, the premier crew that's been chosen to race the Dutch men. Now, they are going to spin around, that mileage in their legs, all set up and geared ready for this second piece, I'm sure, to get that lactate in the legs. They'll be really well trained to spin. But if I were the Dutch now, this is a really difficult position to be in, right? Because, again, you're not training for this type of race necessarily. You've just lost by a clear margin. What are the Dutch now going to do? Do you think they'll come out quite as sharp as they did in the first piece, or do you think they'll calm it down a little bit for the long game of trying to, be more efficient over the course of the piece?
Well, it's interesting because so far this fixture has played out quite similarly to how it did in 2023, and when we raced the Dutch back then, they had a little bit of a slower first fixture. I think we really started to move away through the middle of the race. It was fairly close up until sort of the mile post, at which point we started to move out on the Dutch, and we, I think, finished a similar margin up on the Dutch as these guys have done today. The second piece was a completely different story, and the Dutch really came out swinging. I think the water had calmed down a little bit just around that turn down towards the Barnes Strait, and the Dutch really capitalized on it. And I think these guys are really, really powerful, and you can't underestimate them for a second. And maybe we went off a little bit slower or lacked a bit of that punchiness in the first minute, and the Dutch capitalized on it and then went on to beat us by about a length of clear water. So it was a complete margin flip back then, and I think what the Dutch will want to do now is to really, really go for it off the start. They won't want to let Cambridge slip away in those first couple of minutes, and we might see, with a little bit better conditions, these guys really start to motor it along. And as I say, really powerful unit. I think probably the most powerful Dutch crew we've seen in the last few years. They've kind of brought the best guys from basically the last 2 years of fixtures against Cambridge into 1-8. So yeah, I think they're going to really go for it off the start. And to be honest, I think what Rob will be saying to Cambridge is that they need to really motor it off the start as well, because I would say the one weakness from that last piece is that Cambridge just looked a little bit unsure in that first couple of minutes, particularly around that Middlesex bend. I think the water was getting to them a little bit, looked a little bit clipped relative to how it did later in the piece. And I think what they'll want to do is just really burn it for those first couple of minutes and then settle into something quite devastating. And I think Rob will really be telling them that they've got to do the job earlier.
It's funny that you recount your 2023 experience of being in the fixture and in the crew, because what I've got written on my notes here is that the exact same thing happened in 2024 as well. So maybe this is just the way that the Dutch do it, right? Is like piece one is kind of like okay, we're racing, see how it goes, and then they really jump in piece 2, because Cambridge won 1 and lost 1 last year as well in 2024. So the Dutch, I do think, are very much geared towards coming out swinging in piece 2.
Yeah, I mean, you can't underestimate how difficult it is for a relatively scratched crew to do pieces on the tideway. It is not an easy stretch of water to row on, and it can really throw you for a loop. And now that the tide's a bit higher, just looking out the window here at the embankment, you can just see the movement on the water. It's tricky conditions, and I think the more experience you have doing pieces out here, the better you get. And just from that initial 9 odd minutes of rowing at race pace on this river, I think the Dutch will have learned a lot, and I think they'll be trying to put some of what they learned into practice in a second here.
Yeah, no, totally. And actually, you know what, I think that's something that we probably, again, we've talked a little bit about the build up and the training program on the run up to the boat race is in a very specific period right now. It's a few months ahead of where a lot of the other crews that are training for a summer season of racing will be, including the Dutch. But just in terms of like crew formation and time in combinations and time in crews, Hannah, I know that your experience and the sort of Cambridge Women programme will be different to Seb, who's rowed under Rob, that this crew, who this crew are coached by. But just in terms of the combinations you row and when you're at Ely, back in Cambridge and on the Tideway, how often do those change? How often are you in the same combination through this sort of block between trial 8s and race day? And do you think that rowing together as a combination more frequently gives you, a greater advantage?
I think so. Through the first part of the season, kind of from kind of September through to kind of trial 8s and Christmas, the crews and combinations will be changing around a lot. Probably kind of looking to get people kind of gelled into the Cambridge pattern, and also get the measure of new people. And then from kind of trial 8s through camp in January, things will start to kind of shake in towards provisional Blue Boat Goldie lineups, but as Seb has said, kind of selection will continue to be ongoing, and kind of as that lineup is more established, there will be specific technical crew focuses that can really drive into getting the most out of the individuals in that specific crew, but all of these guys will kind of be looking to prove to Rob that they're in the right place and that this provisional lineup should no longer be provisional, and kind of that's partly why when you see them kind of moving up on those large margins against this Dutch crew here, they're still pushing out. They want more and more and more, and that's not them wanting more against the Dutch, it's wanting more against Oxford in a few weeks' time.
I think the other thing to note is that all these guys have the data from every single stroke that they take being recorded by the telemetry system, and what will happen at the end of this race is that Rob will go and download all that data and look through it and be like, okay, who are the guys that are producing the watts deep into these pieces? Who are the guys that are holding their effective length deep into these pieces? And it's all selection data, because Goldie, who are racing Leander's A boat today, they have the same thing on their boat. And Rob will look at what's happening in terms of who's able to generate the power, and he'll make adjustments to the lineups based on that. And if someone in Goldie is cranking out almost 400 watts down the course, and someone in the provisional Blue Boat lineup is a little bit off the pace, he'll make those changes. So there's a lot riding on these performances, and these guys will not let up for a single second.
It's that bit of jeopardy, isn't it, that sort of keeps the crews pushing on and keeps them performing. That little bit of nervousness around the safety of their seat means that we do get these huge gaps that get produced in these fixture series. They're not just comfortable to sit on a crew and paddle away.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult challenge for an athlete on these programs to feel like you're constantly having to prove yourself, and it's the case where every weekend we'll do pieces out at Ely where it's all basically who can produce the power, and there'll be changes based on that. And it's a tough place to be, but ultimately, if you want to go and win boat races, that's kind of the reality that you have to face up to, and you've got to put yourself in those uncomfortable situations to get the best out of yourself and to make sure that the 8 best guys are in the boat.
Well, we're about to start the second piece now, and we'll see that same stagger that we saw in the women's race, given that the Cambridge crew did manage to complete that stacked piece with such a margin of victory. They will start from a similar-ish footing down on the Dutch crew. We're continuing to... I don't know if we're spinning again here. I feel like maybe the sort of lineup is not going as well as they'd hoped from a coaching perspective. We're going round and round.
Maybe the stream is carrying them down a little bit, and they're having to readjust just to make sure they don't lose too much ground just being carried along by the stream.
Yeah, we do want two sort of half-course pieces, and there is the A8 in the background. We are sort of coming all the way around 360 to get us back into alignment for this next piece. Now, one of the next battles for seats that I think is a really cool story in the Cambridge men's crew is Ollie Boyne. Seb, you'd mentioned him earlier. He was one of the I guess one of those unique, but maybe not so unique, because we've seen it more and more in the last few years, where president without being a member of the Blue Boat crew, a challenge in and itself, I think, to get the right balance of supporting, leading, whilst also being professional within selection. But it looks like for 2025, and I don't want to curse him or jinx him, it looks like he's put himself in a pretty good position to be this year's Blue Boat Cox.
Definitely, and I would say in 2023, which was the last season that he was a part of his presidential season, it was a really, really close call between him and Jasper Parrish. And obviously Jasper, fantastic cox, and his coxing really became the story of that boat race with that move that he took to cut off the Fulham bend. But it was, there was barely anything to pick really between Ollie and Jasper. They brought different things, but those things were really, really good. Both of them bringing fantastic things to the table, and Ollie is such a great leader and organizer, really completely on top of everything. You never have to worry about anything really when Ollie is in your boat. So it's just great to see him in a provisional Blue Boat lineup here. I think he is a fantastic cox. He was a fantastic president, and I took the presidency role the following year, and I feel like I learned a huge amount from Ollie. So just having him in the coxing set here is really, really cool to see.
And brilliant. And again, I love these stories. This is one of my favourite things, is people that have come to rowing through starting a degree at Oxford or Cambridge. He started at Downing College as a cox and has progressed through to being in this position, having had 3 stabs at Goldie, and also now, as I say, on the brink of a 2025 season. Fingers crossed for him that he manages to see it through to boat race day in that cox's seat for the Cambridge Blue Boat. But as we now line up, it looks like relatively even, maybe a slight head start there to the Dutch, not quite as much of a gap perhaps as we were expecting to see. But as we rattle underway, difficult to see with the beautiful sunshine we've got here on the course today. I shouldn't be complaining, but quite match speeds here, Hannah, off the start of this race.
Yeah, I'd say that it looks like both crews have been told by their coaches in the break to really take it to each other off the start. I don't think there's kind of much to split the two crews in terms of their aggression, their intent off this first few strokes.
Yeah, lots of aggression and intent, which we did see from the Dutch first time around, but Seb, you called it right, that Cambridge need to show a little bit more of that, which they are doing here in the second piece, and they have managed to just slide their bows out in front there. Luke Beaver in the bow seat will be able to see the back of the bow of Mats van Saben from the Dutch crew. He stroked the Poznan World Cup 3 quad for the Dutch development side back in the summer of last year, and was also part of the 2024 fixture against Cambridge as well. So again, he knows what it feels like to be side by side with the light blues. But oh gosh, a lot of rocking and rolling there on the right hand side of your picture in the Dutch crew. That would have been quite a throw, Seb.
Yeah, very aggressive steering moves there. Seem to be back on track now, and cost them a little bit. I would say that actually the Dutch had a really, really good start there, because I mean the start of that second piece of the fixture, if you're on the outside, really difficult, really, really difficult. You basically have to stay in touch with a crew with quite a big bend right off the back of obviously that really taxing first piece, and I think they've hung in very, very well here. It actually looks like pretty much level. Can't quite tell if Cambridge might have a seat or two lead, but obviously we're coming up to that Middlesex bend, which is going to heavily favour the Dutch. So it looks like the rhythm's good, and it looks like they're sticking in really well. They're a strong crew. They're rowing well, and I think this is going to pan out to be quite a good race in this second piece here.
The blade work not quite as uniform as we're seeing from the Cambridge crew on the left-hand side, but what they don't have in uniformity, perhaps making up for in raw strength and power. And they are some really tall and strong athletes in this Dutch crew. I was looking, 6'6" is probably the sort of average height of most of the guys here on the right-hand side of your screen, which in rowing terms still pretty tall. But just that tidiness from the Cambridge crew, it will be more efficient for them. It will be certainly helping them through a second piece on the bounce with that lactic acid, but they are going to need to match that with the power that's coming from the Dutch side.
It does. It looks good in the Cambridge boat. It looks a little bit higher than in the first piece. I think they've recognised that the Dutch really mean business here. And again, the Dutch are hanging in there. A little bit of steering adjustments from the cocks. And here we go. We're coming up towards Barnes Bridge, and the Dutch look like they might actually be moving now as the bend starts to kick in.
Now, one of the things we were saying with the Dutch, all 8 of these athletes will have been in singles in January, which is something that, the Cambridge side, that some of them will have been in pairs for GB trials in those smaller boats. But the Dutch, they're used to that single-minded mentality. Only you will make the boat go faster, and having to push yourself to the absolute limit with no one carrying themselves around you is something that I think in these final stretches, final few hundred metres, is going to allow them to just really cling on to Cambridge and perhaps have that gusto to come through in the final stretch. But Cambridge doing well here, but both sides getting a little bit washy, a little bit choppy, and that rocky and rolling still continuing in Sarah Kalf's crew from the Netherlands.
Yeah, you can see this is quite a physical piece. There's a lot of work going down here. And as both crews, as Cambridge tries to break away from the Dutch, and as the Dutch try and claw back into Cambridge's lead, I think Cambridge looked like they were moving around the outside. I think it would be a fantastic thing for Cambridge if they were to break clear around the outside. It would send quite a powerful statement to Oxford. But the Dutch really don't look like they're going anywhere at this stage of the race, and they are clinging on. And I think, we'll be in for a really good next couple of minutes of racing.
Yeah, what I think that Ollie's doing really well here is kind of really holding his line, not getting pulled into kind of Sarah's kind of cutting the bend a little, and I think that she's kind of moved out of the fastest water. It looks like we've got a potential obstruction out in front, and it'll be interesting to see how this develops.
Yeah, single sculler has been caught here in the middle of the river with 2 very experienced crews rattling towards them. They're getting out the way pretty sharpish, but that is not something that we'd have liked to have seen. But still, anything can happen on boat race day. Always good to get these unexpected scenarios out of sight, out of mind. But the Coxes would have been able to see that. I'm not sure whether any instruction would have been given. Again, if I was Ollie or if I was Sarah, again, you'd be wanting to try and keep the crew internal, not distract them, keep them to their race plan. And as we spin now, this is the point at which we're heading for home. The line is within sight as you start to see the bridge there come into view. But look at this chop. This is absolutely, this is absolutely great for the Cambridge crew to get some practice in. Yeah,
absolutely. Going through the bounce from those boats that you could just see on the side there. And Cambridge doing a really good job just sitting up on top of the moving water. I think the pattern's really staying pretty strong here. You can just see the brace around the finish there from the bow seat. Luke Beaver doing a great job setting it up there back in bow. And looks like they're continuing to stretch out around the outside of this bend. The rhythm's holding together really well, rates starting to come up. And I would say that this has been a pretty good second half of this piece from Cambridge. I think they really dealt with the Dutch charge in the first few minutes well, and it looks like they've just really relaxed into their rhythm, and even as it's come up in the rate, they are just striding out. It looks really strong, completed strokes. I think this is a good performance from Cambridge.
Yeah, what a sprint finish here from the light blues. You would absolutely not be able to tell that they've done 2 back-to-back full pace pieces and a huge gap there back to the Dutch, who I think held on for much longer into that second piece, looked much more deliberate and dynamic, but I think maybe just got caught out perhaps, Hannah, by some of the worst wash that the tideway had to throw at them, and that limited practice that they'll have had, you know, basically since this morning.
Yeah, I think we kind of spoke about it as we were kind of watching that first half of the piece, that Cambridge were looking much cleaner through that rough water, and I think having that ability to row cleanly will really conserve your energy and kind of help you kind of just deliver it into the water rather than kind of wasting it, kind of fighting your way through on the recovery. So I think that really will have fed into Cambridge being able to kind of row that more efficient pattern through the second half of the race.
And I think, Seb, you know, one of the benefits that Cambridge have is this hugely strong core of athletes, but in order to be able to utilise that, they need the platform, right? You know, you can have all the strong people in the world, but unless they've got a really well set up platform to be able to put down that power through the choppy and bumpy water, they can be pretty useless if they're unable to actually get locked on and get that stroke underway. And you can see here from these slow-mo shots just how well Rob coaches this crew to be able to do that in unison.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Rob is a really, really strong technical coach, and I think his strength is just being able to get across a certain clarity of technical vision. He really allows crews to hone in on certain aspects of the stroke that really allows them to become more than the sum of their parts. And I think what we've seen from I'd say what we've seen from Cambridge. I was there at the time, but what we really felt over the past few years at Cambridge were that we were able to take underdog athletes, you know, guys that weren't necessarily as strong on paper, and transform them into really formidable racing units relative to Oxford. Now, I think we've got absolutely a fantastic group of athletes, and like seeing what Rob is able to achieve with such strength at the top end and down the boat, you know, the depth is really impressive. I think that's really going to be pretty awesome to watch over the next few weeks and then leading up to the boat race. And I think the performance today is testament to just how good that coaching is and how good the technical model is.
Yeah, it was on full display today, which is exactly what Rob and Luca, when they spoke to us ahead of this fixtures weekend, said that they wanted to put out there on screen. They said that it's the responsibility of Cambridge to push the sport of rowing to produce high standards of crews, regardless of what's going on around this huge race in the racing calendar. It's one of the biggest events that rowing has to offer globally. You know, most people, whether they are interested in rowing or not, have heard of the Oxford and Cambridge boat race, and so to have that as part of their mantra, and they feel it's their responsibility to produce these high quality crews, along with the culture that they've said is just building year on year. And certainly that's something I've heard from the people that I know that are within the Cambridge squad. They just talk about this enjoyment of rowing, and regardless of all that sort of pressure cooker stuff that we've spoken about, Seb, you've even said, right, how uncomfortable it is to sit there in those selection battles right up to the wire, but yet it still seems so enjoyable, and athletes are beaming and so happy about their time in the squad. Getting that balance right is so difficult, yet Rob manages to do it year on year.
Yeah, and I think what's crucial there is that Rob really kind of allows the athletes to develop their own culture, and I think what's been so strong about Cambridge is that the guys are able to produce this kind of dynamic of mixing fun and seriousness in training, and I think that's really kind of settled up and down through the squad, and it's led to a team that really just loves training together. It loves going out to Ely, rowing in the boats, cracking on with some hard ergs in Goldie, and then it really enjoys the time together off the water and outside of the boathouse as well. And I think it's a real pleasure to row for Cambridge. I think that's really crucial. Obviously, the boat race, so high pressure, so high stakes. It can feel like everything is crashing down around you sometimes if things aren't going well. But what Cambridge has done so well over the past few years is to just enjoy the process, and to make the most of it, and to savour the experience of training and competing for Cambridge.
Yeah, I think within the boat race structure, because it's such a kind of binary win-lose situation, it's very easy to get drawn in and kind of focused on, well, in Cambridge's case, just thinking about Oxford all the time and that being the benchmark. But I think something that Rob does really well is pushing on beyond that and wanting Cambridge to be kind of the best representation that it can be, kind of nationally and internationally. Then he's not just looking for his crews to be faster than Oxford, he's looking for them to be kind of standout crews kind of globally in the university and kind of otherwise seen.
Yeah, and I cannot wait to see this crew continue to step on. There's still over a month to go until race day, so lots more improvements to find, combinations to find, and a crew to select. So that all to look forward to. But yeah, a brilliant day, perfect weather, some great races, and I think, the Cambridge women and the Cambridge men going back to Ely with quite different results, but with different information to work on into the final few weeks of this campaign. So a big thank you to everyone for tuning in. It's been fantastic. I've been Camilla Hadland-Horrocks. I've been joined by Hannah Roberts and Seb Benzacree here from the Cambridge University alumni. And one last thing to mention is that I cannot wait for season 2 of Turning the Tide to be coming out this week. Wednesday the 5th of March at 6 p.m, first episode released. So just a couple of days more to wait for that brilliant documentary to be back on our screens. So with that, we're going to wish you goodbye, and we'll be back again on the 29th and 30th of March weekend for the Oxford University fixtures. Thanks very much. It's not just that we want to win, there are jobs and reputations on the line here.
Finish 15. Lessons to learn.
I don't know why you keep looking at me for advice.
You believe in yourself.
Oxford came here to try and turn the tide, but it has not turned yet.
We can win this.
Not here just to have a fun time.
Utter despondence in the Oxford crew.
Yeah, it would probably really suck if we didn't win.
I will sell my soul to the devil to win this race.